Right, I've recovered myself. Hello, hello everyone, and welcome to another album review with me, James Bell, here in my studio in native Northumberland. And this week I'm bringing to you this album. It's Enya, it's Watermark, it's from 1988. What can I say? It's brilliant. Let's dive into it. So, Enya's career started in the early 1980s. She first started performing with her family band, Clannad, which is a Celtic Irish band, and they had really good success. They brought the tradition of Irish music to an international stage, essentially. But after a few years, she wanted to start pursuing her own solo career. And the band's manager, Nicky Ryan, went with her as well. And she had a few commissions over the 1980s, most notably in 1987 for the BBC documentary The Celts. Now, for this documentary, she produced a soundtrack, and she then released this soundtrack as her debut album through Atlantic and BBC Records. And it had a mild success. It garnered some attention, most notably from Rob Dickens, who was the chairman of Warner Music. And I think he loved the Celts. This is it here, by the way. It was originally released as Enya, but then when it was re-released on Warner Music, it was released as Enya the Celts. There's a label covering her face, I'm really sorry about that. HMV label, I think. But when he had the chance meeting with Enya, and he essentially asked, asked if she would like to sign to Warner Music. And he gave her a deal that if she did sign, she would have complete artistic freedom, there'd be no deadlines, and she'd be able to do what she felt like she needed to do in her own time, which I think for Enya was great because she needed that freedom to explore all these avenues and to really craft a sound and to not have any restrictions on her, because what she did with the Celts was breaking new ground. I mean, she used all these sort of synth sounds, and it was kind of like traditional Irish Celtic music, and yet completely new as well. And I think her and Nicky had really come up with these interesting techniques for wall of sounds and these different things, and that's what they continued doing in Watermark. And in Watermark, they started then producing a demo for Rob Dickens in Ireland, with Nicky's wife Roma being the lyricist. And so the three of them produced this kind of demo for Rob Dickens. And then when they brought it, they realised that there was a lot of tape. He said, use all this analogue equipment. And they realised, Rob Dickens realised that it would be better if it was realised in digital production, and digital production was just starting to come to the forefront, really, and starting to replace analog equipment. And I think it was very new for Enya and new for everyone, I think. But they really did adapt to it well. And so they spent the time in London to craft all the ideas and to realise all the ideas they'd come up for the Watermark album in London. And the first track on here, and you've got to love this front cover. I mean, it really fits in with what Enya wanted and the way she wanted to be portrayed as well as an artist, and to not be the sort of next kind of glamour girl on the scene. She wanted to be portrayed in this sort of, in a very artistic way, but making her own artistic statement, which is what I love. But the first track, which is the title track, Watermark, is this real sense of serenity, and it's this piano solo, and it really cuts through and just strikes a chord instantly with the listener. It really is something. And then we get these really lovely layered vocals behind. And Nikki and Enya had been working on these layered vocals to give it a real deep texture. I think they took inspiration from like the technique of sound on sound and things that the Beach Boys did. And it works so wonderfully. I mean, I've been experimenting doing sound on sound on this reel-to-reel machine here over the last few weeks, and it's just a great technique to try and just to experiment with it. There's a lot you can do with it, but it just sounds so haunting, and the Watermark is definitely, sets the tone for the rest of the album. Cursum Pacifico is actually Latin for "your journey ends here," I believe. And it was actually, they actually got this saying from a documentary on Marilyn Monroe, and she had this, I think, on the doorstep of her house. And I think it's such a good phrase, isn't it? To "your journey ends here." I think that's, as in like, you're back home kind of thing. And it's got a kind of more, and unlike the sort of title of the track, it's maybe slightly more troubled. It's got almost kind of to me, it's almost got a sort of stormy element with those kind of synths and those kind of quite agitated vocals from Enya in the Latin lyrics. I mean, the lyrics themselves are brilliant in this album because they're in so many different languages. We've got Latin, English, Irish. And I think that's what sets Enya's music apart. I think what sets it apart is the fact that it kind of almost fed into the kind of traditional Cayley and Irish folk scene, but at the same time it was really cutting new ground with using synthesizers, with the Juno 60, which was her favourite, and Yamaha DX7s, all these really great synthesizers. But at the same time, where appropriate, she wasn't afraid to use acoustic instruments either. So on the next track, on Your Shore, it's got a really lovely clarinet solo. And it just adds, again, a sense of realism. I think it would have been all too easy to go completely overboard synthesizer with everything. I guess it's very, it's you have to strike a balance between, creating interesting sounds and not sounding too artificial. But it's amazing because none of the tracks on Enya's Watermark, or none of Enya's things in general, sound at all artificial. And I guess that's usually a connotation associated with synthesizers, is that it can sound artificial. Storms in Africa, which was released as a single, and a lot of these names they came up with after they'd written the tracks. And again, it's not as kind of stormy as you'd think it would be, but kind of almost an approaching storm. And it has got that kind of, far away feel about it. Like it's an almost sand-like. And I love the pop videos they've got for the singles on this album. I remember, I think the first time I heard some of these songs was when I was at my cousin's house, and they had the video of all the pop videos from the songs from Watermark, and I remember just watching them and just being transfixed because I'd never seen anything like it before, and they really reflect the kind of artwork here. This really informed how the pop videos were going to look. Exile 2 is such a haunting track. I mean, the amount of reverb that they use in this album is tremendous, and it really adds to the effect of magic. There's a real sense of magic, and you can really hear like sort of all this Celtic influence within the track, and none more so than Exile. And I think it all ties together with this, again, a beautiful flute solo, very much like the clarinet solo in On Your Shore. And then we get a slightly different flavour with Miss Claire Remembers. I think it's such a lovely track. It's slightly different to all the others. It's a mostly a piano solo track, and originally Enya had composed this in the early 1980s, and they re-recorded it for this album. And they thought, well, does it have to be a piano solo? Could we try it with voices or whatever? And they did try a few different things, but in the end they decided that it sounded best just keeping it as a piano solo, and I have to agree. There's something so simplistic about it. It refers to a novel by Miss Reed about a girl about a girl's life in a rural village. And it kind of captures that essence of rural life, doesn't it? And kind of how free and how simplistic it can be, how you're away from sort of the worldly pressures and from the outside world as such. You're kind of cut off, and you kind of get that, and how simple things and serenic things can be. Or have been. I don't know if it's kind of remembering on the fade a bit. It's kind of feels like it's a bit on the fade. And then side B, and we start with this one, don't we? Orinoco Flow, or as most people like to say, sail away, sail away, sail away. I think they got to the point in the album. I think it's quite amazing, actually. You know, they had composed, I think they'd written everything else for this album, and they realised we're still quite short of the 40 minutes needed for the album. And so they worked on some ideas that Enya had, and they created Orinoco Flow. And it took a while for them to craft it and to make sure it wasn't too repetitive. The lyrics that Roma Ryan writes for Sail Away, I think, are brilliant, because they managed to squeeze in references like Rob Dickens at the wheel, which I think Rob Dickens was a bit like, oh, okay, when he first heard it. He wasn't quite sure to start with, but he eventually found it quite funny, so that it was kept in. And it's just it's such an earworm, but so effective, and it's really refreshing. Like that synth of the plucking synth sound you hear right at the start. It just draws you in completely, and you really get a sense of ships and of sea and of travelling. It works wonderfully, and the repetition, I feel, is so essential for this kind of earworm, and why it just captured the imagination of everyone who listens to it. It just really captures the essence of sailing, and it's like no other song out there. It's completely different, and when you think about what else was in the charts around that mark in 1988, it's just completely different. I think the final tracks on this album, Evening Falls, again, it's very haunting. It's got a haunting element to it. And then River is an instrumental track, and you get the real sense of a river. I think Enya's very good at portraying what she's trying to show in music. She's very good at kind of giving visual analogies. And again, with the long ships, with the kind of vocal sound she's got, and that you've got a real sense of the Vikings coming over to Britain in the longboats, and it's a very powerful image, I think. And then the final track is in Enya's native language, Irish, and it's just such a lovely track to end on. And it gives the sense of showing her roots, and it really just finishes off the album so well. I can't put into words this album enough. It really is one of a kind, and you can't box it. You can't put it into a genre because it's so unique. And that's what I love when you can say that about an album, that you can't really compare it to anything else. I think that's what makes some of the greatest albums out there, where there's nothing else like it. And it makes everyone take attention to it because there's nothing else like this. It's just completely original. So yes. So I love Enya. It's just such a great album. I love it. And what's so great as well, and what's so nice as well on that final track is that she leaves a dedication to her grandparents on the final track, which I think is really, really lovely. So that was Enya's Watermark for this week from 1988. Next week I will be looking at this. Da, 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 da. The Dreaming, Kate Bush. I love it. I can't wait. So I can't wait to delve into this madness. It's such a great album. It's mad, but I love it because I love mad albums and it's brilliant. So we'll be delving into this next week. So tune in, same time, same place next week for Kate Bush, The Dreaming. That's all from me, and I think I am now going to play the piano. Da, 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 da. Let's play. Ooh. There. See you next week.
Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this review. And why not check out some of my other videos too?